Lighting candles on the Sabbath eve is an iconic tradition. What if I told you it was introduced as a radical protest against those who would make the Sabbath a burden? In this segment, we discuss the practices of ancient sects like the Essenes and the Karaites, who had strict interpretations of Shabbat laws, including sitting in darkness and eating cold food. The conversation underscores the fluidity of Shabbat customs and the ongoing dialogue between tradition and modernity. So what I'm trying to get at is that we all assume Shabbat observance is like there's a consensus about it. It's always been the same. Certain things you can do, certain things you cannot do. But the truth is, it is extremely fluid. They have looked, if you look at Josephus, for instance, the Roman historian, he says that the Essenes who were living in the desert and were ascetic and were very, I would say, had high requirements, they were more strict than the Jews who, in terms of the seventh day, they not only get their food ready the day before, and I think the assumption there is they heat the food the day before and they eat it cold. They may not be obliged to light a fire on that day. I think we're going to see that there are opinions that believe that whether it's the Essenes or it's the Karaites, they were very rigid in their Shabbat. I think if we looked at their Shabbat, we would find it very un-Shabbistic. We would not recognize ourselves at all. And, along with not lighting a fire, in Exodus 16:29, it says, "Let everyone remain in place. Let no one leave the vicinity on the seventh day." So again, Josephus says they may have stayed inside of their domain in pitch darkness. Totally strange to us. What I found fascinating was in the Ibn Ezra under "You shall kindle no fire." He says, since scripture earlier mentioned with regard to the first and the seventh day of the festival of unleavened bread, no matter of work shall be done. So he says, what it teaches us is you're allowed to prepare food on Yom Tov, but you are not allowed to prepare it on Shabbat. And he goes on to say, Rab Saadia Gaon composed a very important work refuting those who dispute with the ancients regarding the Sabbath lights. The translator says the reference is to Karaites who prohibit a candle that is lit before the onset of the Shabbat from continuing to burn on the Shabbat. I found this before in academic sources. I had never found it in classical rabbinic sources.
Ibn Ezra is the one source who talks about it. That's amazing. Okay. So you want to explain the Karaites forced everyone to sit in the dark on Friday night.
It's unheard of to us. It is totally unheard of to us. And I said a little bit of this in the intro. It makes, sometimes if we're lucky in an episode of Madlik, it makes us look at things that we do on a regular basis differently. This year, when my wife lights the Shabbat candles, I am saying to myself, the rabbis instituted this lighting of candles right before Shabbat to refute the Karaites, to refute their concept of a dark Shabbat. It makes me, when I go to synagogue and say Bameh Madlikin right before we start, the whole idea of lighting candles is nowhere contained within our ancient texts. But if you look at it from the perspective of this dispute with the Karaites, the rabbis were making a statement by lighting those candles. There has to be light in the Shabbat home. It's profound.
It's the fancy word for that is polemic. They were responding to a view of the Karaites and they were fighting against it. And that's why they introduced Shabbos candles.
But again, what it goes to say is we take Sabbath observance as a given. And the truth is we can travel and see different customs. We've said in previous episode how taking out of the Torah and raising it is in different congregations. But the Sabbath itself, the way it's observed, has been fluid and has been different. So we were exposed a little bit to this rigidity on the part of the Essenes, maybe, and the Karaites. Shai Cohen, a great scholar of ancient Judaism, wrote a beautiful monologue, said, dancing, clapping, meditating, Jewish and Christian observance of the Sabbath in Pseudo-Ignatius. And he says that people used to dance on balconies, men danced downstairs, women in balconies, they swam, they even went to theater in the observance of the day of rest. If I try to transmit one concept today is, we know that Shabbat is different, but that doesn't necessarily give us a license to assume how it's different. We can do different things, we can experiment in different ways, and we become part of this rich traditions of a living Shabbat. It changes over time.